My first assignment was in the 82nd Airborne Division. At the time, we were making about $200 a month. I think it was $220, $210. And so if you were airborne, you got an extra $110 a month, and you don't have to be a CPA to figure out that that's instantly a 50% increase in salary. This was in 1966, and we were doing lots and lots of things getting ready to go to Vietnam. My brigade, the 3rd Brigade, eventually went to Vietnam. The following year in 67, although I got dragged out to go be an advisor to a Vietnamese infantry battalion, which is a separate story altogether. But I ran across General Schwarzkopf on and off for a long, long time while I was in the Army. The first was when I was a lieutenant, and I can't remember under what circumstances it was, but for some inexplicable reason, we were all doing support, and for some reason he was in charge of some aspect of supporting the infantry school. He was a fairly high-ranking guy. He was a major in the Army, and I was a 2nd lieutenant, and there's about as much of a, it's only 10 years. He was only 10 years older than I am, but it might be a million years. It could have well as been a billion years. There's such a gulf between being a 2nd lieutenant and being a major. And for some reason, he was in charge of some aspect of support whereby I had to deal with him about billeting for my troops. And he's an enormous man, as you know. Everybody looks big to me. I had to get a waiver to get a commission in the Army. You have to be 5'6". I wasn't 5'4" then, and I'm a heck of a lot less than that now. But I got a waiver and got a commission, and he's a very large guy. When I look at anybody, all I can see is their chin and their forehead, you know. But he was a big guy. He was always a big guy, and he's an intimidating guy, both because of his size and because of his demeanor. He knows he's a big guy, and he is himself at all times. He doesn't try to hide the fact that he's a rough, tough, gruff guy. And so you can imagine what it was like being a weaselly little 2nd lieutenant with 5 jumps under his belt, talking to Major Norman Schwarzkopf. And by the way, I knew a bit about him too, because I went to high school and college in New Jersey, and he started out as a Jersey boy. His father ran the state police. So he was a known quantity when I saw him. Scared as hell of him, and I was trying to make a small point about the quality of billeting for my troops. And he looked at me as if I just landed from Mars and I couldn't speak English, and that I was a burr under his seat. And he rose up out of his chair about halfway, which automatically made him twice as tall as I was. I can't remember what he said, but he just bellowed at me. And the sheer the gale force of his voice just about blew. I could barely heavy enough to open up a canopy, but the gale force of his voice just about blew me out of the office. I can't remember what he said exactly, but whatever it was, it shut me up, sent me out of the office, and convinced me, in fact, that I didn't have to ask for any of the things I was looking for from my troops. You know, I've seen that speech a number of times, and more recently, in the last few weeks or so. And I'm really awestruck by 2 things. First of all, is the applicability of what he says to being a leader in the Army. What he said then is exactly what you could say right now, and it would have the same application. And as a matter of fact, I think the really great men have a lot to say about things today which are going to be applicable centuries later. It's stuff to remember. And I think if you were to ask, you might ask him whether or not he'd say anything different. There may be 1 or 2 minor things that he might say that he would say different. But the gist of his message about leadership, about this place, about West Point, about how important it is to our freedom, I don't think he'd change a single solitary word of it. And you know something else? You talk about the iconic speeches. The other one, and you and I discussed it, and I don't think anybody would disagree, is MacArthur's speech in 1962. Though their demeanors are different, though the delivery is different, though the words are different, the message is really the same. This is a hallowed place, and the people who go to school here, who leave here, who go to lead from here, bring with them the most important bits of essence of the United States of America. We shouldn't forget it. People come up to me all the time. They do this to all veterans. They thank you for your service. Some people might, the reflexive reaction is, oh, you're welcome. But it's not how I think about it. And I don't think it's how Norman Schwarzkopf thinks about it. It is, as you say, not you're welcome. It is an honor to serve. It was my honor to wear the uniform, and I think General Schwarzkopf feels exactly the same way. I believed then when I came into the Army, and I believe today that everybody who's lucky enough to live in the United States of America, to be free, to be able to say what you want to say, if you're lucky enough to be an American, then you owe America and the notion of America something in the way of service. You're looking at somebody who believes in universal service. And I don't think you have to serve 20 years or even 4 years or 2 years, but you've got to do something. You've got to do something for the United States of America. You can't just sit back, relax, and enjoy the fruits of the labor, service, and sacrifice of other people. You've got to contribute. I came into the Army at a time when service, military service, was not exactly the most popular thing in the world. But I had grown up just after World War II. I was born just before the war ended. My father had served in the United States Army in New Guinea and the Philippines. His parents, my mother's parents, had immigrated, were immigrants here, had immigrated to the United States from Europe, and had a strong sense of being an American, of being lucky to be in a country where they could be free, because they weren't free back where they came from. And I just automatically assumed that when I got old enough, I was going to serve. My father had served in the Second World War. I was going to serve, put my 3 years in, and then go out and do whatever I was going to do. But I stayed. And I stayed because I thought the mission was important, all right. But I really would have missed the people. And today, when people ask me, what do I miss the most about the United States Army? I'll tell them the truth. It's the people. Because of technological developments, thankfully, we can still stay in touch with old buds of ours. But the notion of service runs strong and ran strong in my neighborhood in New York City, where I grew up, and in my family. You've got to do something to preserve the notions of freedom, and that's going to take service and sacrifice. That runs strong in my family. Norman Schwarzkopf, in many respects, never cared what other people thought about him. I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but he was always himself. He never tried to be somebody else. He didn't try to model himself after anybody else so that he could squeeze Norman Schwarzkopf into somebody else's body, psyche, or a method of leadership. The notion that he passed on to people who knew him was that you had to be yourself. And I think that's absolutely correct when you're thinking about leadership. If you try to be somebody else, any private, no-class dog face is going to be able to suss you out. He'll know you're trying to be somebody else. And you can't fool troops. You just can't fool them. And the best advice I would have for cadets at the military academy, for anybody who wants to be a leader, even a private, no-class dog face trying hard to be an E5, is that you've got to be yourself. I think you lead from the heart and from the gut. And those who do so are successful. Those who don't are not.